Okay, we are learning Basi Legani, Tafshin Chaf. We are in the middle of chapter 2. So we're in chapter 2. There's a link in the chat on the top, a link to a PDF with the Hebrew, the booklet prepared by Vad Hanochis B'Lashon HaKodesh, by Lahak. And we're going to be on page Yud Daled of that printout. So we're on page Yud Daled, and we are the bottom paragraph on the page. So we said that this year we're focusing on the 10th chapter of the previous Rebbe's Maimer, of his Hemshech, of his series, beginning with Basi Legani. And we, in the first class, we summarized the Maimer up to chapter 10, and then we turned our attention to chapter 10 in the beginning of our Maimer, chapter 2, and we talked about 2 points. There's Va'asu li migdash v'shachanti b'soicham b'soich kol echad ve'echad, that the verse says that God instructs the people to make a sanctuary for him, and he will dwell in them. And as we quoted from Chazal, that in dwelling in them means in each and every one of us. So that was one point, that we have the capacity, the ability, in fact, we have the mandate. We're commanded to build a home for God in this world. And in this world means not just in this world, but in each and every one of ourselves, in us, and that this is the fulfillment of Dira B'Tachtonim, that God desires a home in this world. By building the sanctuary for God, that brings about the fulfillment of God's desire in creation, which is for a home in this world, which we connected to the pasuk Basi Legani, Achesikala, the opening verse of our Maimer, that God says, I've come to my garden, which is mine, where I've already been. But the focus here is on the fact that this is the place where God always wanted to be, where he wanted to be all along, because why does it mean that he wanted to be here all along? It means that this is what moved him to create in the first place. And we explained in the second paragraph of chapter 2 that this idea of God desiring a home in this world. So we're talking about building a home for God in this world. And the reason we're building a home for God in this world is a response to God's desire for a home in this world. So when we talk about the building a home for God in this world as a response to his desire, we've reached the ultimate purpose in creation. Because as we quoted in the last class, Kabbalah brings different reasons for why God chose to create a world, and as we explained, those are all reasons, but while they run very deep, so to speak, within God, but they don't capture the essence. When we say that God desired a home in this world, so what we're saying is that this is something that comes from God's essence. It's not a response to a question. It's not motivated by anything other than an expression of God's very essence, which is why, what is the desire for a home? What's the purpose of a home? The function, the purpose of a home is that's where a person can be as himself. There's no reason to be in a home. You don't have to do anything to be home. A home is where you are. That's your place. That's your space. So who's home? The one that's home is the person in his very essence. That's where his essence could be manifest. So we said that we're talking about building a home for God. If we're talking about building a home, then we're talking about a home for his essence. And if we talk about the fact that we're building a home for his essence, that's what we said that our service of building a home for God is kadiskafi satrachra, by breaking the lie of the unholy, which conceals godliness. By breaking that and transforming it, we cause an effusion, a revelation of godliness in the entire world in a manner of istalik, which we said we touched on a number of parts of that phrase from the Zohar that basically identify what we're talking about as God's essence. So we're talking about making a home for God's essence in this world. How is that done? It's done through our divine service, the divine service of the Jewish people in this world. Okay. Now, the bottom paragraph of page Yud Daled, page 14 here in the PDF handout. So it says like this: So we'll get a better understanding in the topic that's explored in this chapter 10 of the previous Rebbe. Al Pi Teiras Baal Shem Tov, by introducing a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov taught from a person's great humility, he causes that he will be distant from serving Hashem. It distances him from serving God. What does this mean? Because of his lowliness, because of his lowliness, he doesn't believe that man can cause, as a result of his prayer or his Torah study, divine energy to flow into all the worlds. He doesn't feel that he has that impact. He feels insignificant. Not only can he bring divine energy into all the world, but also the angels are nourished by his Torah and his Torah study and his prayer. So, because were a person to actually believe that this was the case, that his Torah study and his prayer cause divine energy to flow through all the worlds, and also is what nourishes the angels. So, if he were to believe that, so how great would his service to God be in great joy and great awe, above all other pleasures. So the Baal Shem Tov says that a person's humility sometimes causes him to think that he's insignificant. Because he thinks he's insignificant, he doesn't realize that the impact that he has by serving God through learning Torah and prayer. Because were he to realize and appreciate the fact that his davening and his learning cause such a great commotion up in heaven, that they cause divine energy to flow into the higher realms, and that the angels are nourished by his study and his prayer, then he would be serving God with great enthusiasm. So the fact that he doesn't believe it, why doesn't he believe it? Because he doesn't think that highly of himself. He doesn't think of himself to be significant. So therefore, his service of God lacks enthusiasm. It's uninspired. But the Gam lost a slave. So the Baal Shem Tov continues that the person should realize that the impact, and also should be mindful of what it says in Tishkavun Bein Shvatoim, the pasuk in Tehillim that says that were you to dwell on the stovetop between the pots. But basically, the verse is describing the Jewish people as being dirty. The stovetop where you put the pots is full of ash and it's dirty. So, for a person to lay down on the bed of the stove, he would get all sullied from the ash. And so, nevertheless, the verse continues that God, nevertheless, will raise them up. But the point is like this: the Baal Shem Tov focuses here on this first part of the verse. Not that that the person is blackened by his lowliness or his sins, or the verse, the commentaries, many of the commentaries on Tehillim say that it's reference to the state of the Jewish people in exile. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu shomer v'sheked al sfasa adam lenoishka. But Baal Shem Tov reads the word not shvatoyim, which means between the pots on the stovetop, but as sfasayim, as the lips. So God is tishkavun, that Hashem Himself sort of lays by the lips, meaning Shakadosh Baruch Hu, that God shomer v'sheked, He waits persistently al sfasa adam. So he's waiting constantly by the lips of man, l'noishka, to kiss them, when the Jew uses his lips to mouth words of Torah and of davening and of prayer. God is standing there waiting at his lips to be able to kiss him. So before we mentioned that the Jew doesn't feel significant, that he's impacting the higher worlds and the angels. But here, the Baal Shem Tov is adding another point. Not only does your service impact the higher realms and the angels, but it impacts God Himself. That God Himself is waiting to hear what you have to say. He's waiting for an opportunity to kiss you. So, who is the man that would not be seized gripped by trembling and shaking, Shahamela Gadol v'Noira, that the great and awesome king, Shomer v'Sheked al Sfasayim shel Adam chulu, waits constantly by the lips of man, waits eagerly there. So therefore, a person has to take this to heart and has to say that kol tenu oisav va'asak, of every movement and every act of his, every activity, v'dibure, and every word he says, has an impact up above. However, when a person thinks to himself, who am I? That I have some kind of value inside, hidden, a treasure hidden inside of me, that I'm significant, or that I can impact heaven or earth. And because of this, due to this total self-degradation that the person has, saying that he's worthless, that lowly feeling causes him to go at the to just follow the whims of his heart. In other words, not to engage in divine service. This is similar to what the Gemara says, that the humility, or really more the tolerance of Rabbi Zechariah, led to the destruction of the temple. Ad kan teres Baal Shem Tov. This is the end of this particular teaching that we're quoting from the Baal Shem Tov. What's the story with Rabbi Zechariah? So the Gemara says, it's the end of the famous story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa in the Gemara, that says that the temple was destroyed because of the events of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Just briefly, the story is that somebody had thrown a party and he invited his friend Kamsa. And the messenger who went to invite Kamsa accidentally invited a guy named Bar Kamsa, who was the host. It was the host's enemy, and the host kicked him out, made a big scene. Bar Kamsa was outraged. Long story short, he goes to Nero and has him send the emperor of Rome to send us and libels the Jewish people. And he says, to prove it, that they're not faithful to you, send a sacrifice and you'll see they'll reject it. So he sends a sacrifice. On the way, Bar Kamsa makes a little blemish in the eyelid of the animal. And the sages at the temple notice it, and they weren't sure what to do, because they knew that this was a sacrifice being sent by the emperor, who was obviously in control then and was very important, and they wanted to remain in his good graces. So they didn't know what to do. And Zechariah, so they thought that they're going to offer the sacrifice. And Zechariah said, you can't offer the sacrifice. People are going to say that you're allowed to offer such a sacrifice. They thought they should take matters of Bar Kamsa in their own hands and deal with Bar Kamsa. He said, you can't do that either. People are going to get the wrong impression, think that you're exacting justice against him for a crime for which capital punishment is not the punishment. So they rejected the animal, and they left Bar Kamsa alone. Word got back to Nero that the Jews had rejected his sacrifice and his offering, which for non-Jews, the blemish in the eyelid it doesn't invalidate a sacrifice to their gods. And that led to the destruction. So the sages said that it was Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas' humility, his anvesanus, his humility, that led to the destruction. But really, we're not going to translate it as humility here, although it's also humility, but really it means that he was unwilling to really stand up. It's more that he was more pacifist in that sense, and that he did not want to stand up and make that hard decision. Maybe he felt unworthy of taking such a stand to be able to say that this is a circumstance that calls for some kind of an override and special consideration. He was unwilling to do that. Okay, so that's the story. So the Baal Shem Tov says that a person has to realize how significant and how important he really is. That his service of Hashem impacts the heavenly realms, it impacts the angels, it even impacts God himself. God himself waits eagerly by the person to see that he's going to be speaking words of Torah and davening, and so that he can have an opportunity to kiss them. Baal Shem Tov says that awareness leads to a person serving God with great enthusiasm. He will serve God with great joy, a joy that supersedes any other joys and pleasures that a person can conceive of. So the fact that a person is not doing that It's because he belittles himself. He degrades himself. He thinks that he's not significant. And because he's not significant, he can't have that impact. He doesn't feel special about himself, unique, or have that he has any kind of special ability, any kind of special purpose that was given to him by God. And therefore, he feels that he's useless or he can't be impactful. And as a result, he doesn't engage in divine service because he doesn't feel that it's something that he can see through or make a difference in. And so therefore does whatever he wants. And that's what the Baal Shem Tov says, that this is similar to the false humility, as it were, of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas. Okay, which led to the destruction of the temple. So now the Rebbe is going to dissect this teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. So now, the Hine, next paragraph, this is the paragraph on page Tes Vav, if you're following along. So V'hine Misiyum Teres Baal Shem Tov, from the end of the Baal Shem Tov's teaching, this last piece, the Shahanova Shalebim Kema Hi Al Derech Han V'Sunosi Shel Rabbi Zechariah Shegomer Churban Beis Hamikdash, that misplaced humility is similar to the misplaced humility of Rabbi Zechariah, which caused the destruction of the temple. So move on. From this, we can infer that when a person's divine service is proper, meaning that he serves God in a way that's the opposite of misplaced humility. So this would be the opposite of destruction. This means if misplaced humility leads to the destruction of the temple, so not misplaced humility, meaning a healthy appreciation for the impact that a person and the power that a person has, will lead to the opposite of the destruction, which is to the building of the Beis Hamikdash, building of the temple. So this then is the meaning of the previous Rebbe writes in the beginning of this chapter 10, that this is the meaning of what it says, that build for me a sanctuary, I will dwell in them. And it doesn't say in it, but in them, in each and every one of us, that it's within each and every one of our abilities and powers to be able to build the Beis Hamikdash. So that's a number one, sort of a connection between the teaching of Baal Shem Tov and what we're talking about here in the Maimon. But the Rebbe adds, another thing, that even though in the beginning of the Baal Shem Tov's teaching that we quoted in the previous paragraph, that where he says that this man's service of study of Torah and prayer affects an infusion of divine energy in all the worlds, and also in the angels. Nevertheless, from what is explained, as Baal Shem Tov continues in his teaching, that this Melech Gadol V'Noira, that the great and awesome king, waits and is consistently at man's lips to see if he's speaking words of Torah and Tefillah. And how does he describe God? He describes him as Melech Gadol V'Noira Daika, the great and awesome king. Move on. Sometimes we call God the Melech Malchei Amlachim, the King of Kings. But here we're calling him Melech Gadol V'Noira, great and awesome. So move on. So the fact that we refer to God as the great and awesome king means that we're talking. So first of all, we're talking about God here. We're not talking about higher realms or angels. We're talking about God himself. But when we're talking about God himself, what are we talking about how are we referring to God as the great and awesome king? So the great and awesome king is a reference to God, not as he is a king over people, over subjects, but an essential kingship. This means that we're talking about malchus, about kingship, God, because we're referring to God as king, but God as he's king within his essence. This is higher than the source of the 9 divine attributes that are in Zerampi, which is the first 9 of the divine attributes from Chachma all the way through, from wisdom all the way through Yesod, foundation or bonding. Which means that through a person's service, it draws God down. If God is waiting for a person to say words of Torah and davening, So then what happens when a person says that God, as it were, as the Baal Shem Tov says, comes to kiss him on the lips? This means God is, who? What are we drawing? We're drawing God himself. And what level of, so to speak, of God? God as he's referred to, Melech Gadol V'Noira, God who is a great and awesome king. What level would describe God as a great and awesome king? God as he's a king within his essence. So let's unpack these words here. So when we refer to God as king, there's a king. We know that Ein Melech B'lei Am. Generally, when we say that there's a king, the Malchus. So let's take it from another angle. When we talk about the divine attributes, so the lowest of the divine attributes is the attribute of Malchus, right? And here we say higher than the spheres of Zah. There's Zah and there's Malchus. Malchus is not part of Zah. Malchus is already even lower than the first 9 divine attributes. Why? Because Malchus, kingship, leadership, it represents leading something else. So there is a person has, applying it, let's say, to the 10 faculties of the soul. The first 9 faculties are all internal faculties. They're all internal experiences, things that a person experiences on his own. But Malchus, it represents the transition from within oneself out to something else. That's why Malchus, leadership, is you lead others. You can't lead if there's nobody to follow. So leadership implies that there are others following you. So already the quality of leadership is expressed through others. It's a quality in relation to others. It's not something that's within oneself. Similarly, Malchus is referred to as peh, as mouth, or as speech. Speech is an ability, a faculty that's required for others to communicate with others. If one is the only person, there's nobody to talk to, there'd be no need for speech. So Malchus already is that transition. It's called Malchus because it leads over it rules over, so to speak, over the next level down. But it's already the lowest part of the person as it comes to the next level. So Malchus, when we talk about God as a king, we can get lost in davening, certainly full of these meditations of God as he's king, which is certainly a tremendous thing. But it's we're referring to a much lower level of God, so to speak, a level where God lowers himself, so to speak, to rule over something else. But then there's Malchus, there's rulership, there's kingship, that's an internal quality. So the concept, and that's called in Chassidus Hisnasus Atzmis. Hisnasus Atzmis is a concept that's really hard to understand. And we're not gonna get into it now, or attempt to try and work on it. But essentially, it's not. We say every day in davening, Adon Olam, at the beginning of davening, Adon Olam, that God is the master of the world, and it says that He ruled before anything was created. Asher Molach B'terem Kol Yitzur Nivra, who ruled before he created anything. So of course the question is asked: how could God rule if there's nothing to rule? And so yet that's a reference to Hisnas Asmi, to a sort of an essential rulership quality. In Chassidus, it talks about the idea that a king, the difference between a king and a minister rules over other people. A king is somebody who's, like it describes by Shol, Meshichmei V'Mayli, he's head and shoulders above everybody else. That the king really is removed from everything else, removed from everybody else. It's just that when he becomes a ruler over men, a ruler over people, over subjects, that essential rulership quality is somehow manifest. But the point is that Hisnasus Atzmis means a quality of rulership that is essential, that's rooted in the essence, that goes beyond anything. So we could refer to God as a king. We can refer to him as the king of the universe, the master of the universe. Melech ha'olam. But when we refer to him as Melech Gadol V'Noira, as the Baal Shem Tov refers to him here, so here the Rebbe says, referring to him as Melech Gadol V'Noira, great and awesome, that means we're referring to God as he is king in his essence, removed from everything. Even within a rulership, even within that kingship, it's explained in Chassidus, there are 3 stages, even within, but that's not, and we're referring to the highest one, the one where it's rooted in his essence. Okay. So what the Rebbe is doing here is identifying how through our where are we affecting God through our service? We're affecting God as he is Melech Gadol V'Noira. We're affecting God in his essence, impacting God connecting with God in His essence. That's what he's saying here. This is also the meaning of what the Baal Shem Tov says, that were a person to really believe what he's doing, the impact that he has, so then he would serve God with joy. Meiroiv koil. Meiroiv koil means let's see how the Rebbe spells out Meiroiv koil, from great abundance. What does this mean? Ki yadua, as is known, b'pirush hakasav avadat Hashem leikecha b'simcha v'tuv levav meiroiv koil. The pasuk says, well, really, the pasuk actually comes towards the end of a really harsh section of the Torah, where God spells out the terrible things that would visit the people as a result of them turning away from Him. But in the end, it says, why did this all happen? Because you didn't serve God with joy in great abundance. In other words, when you had everything you needed, when life was great, and when you were blessed, and you were flourishing, and you were prospering, you didn't serve God with joy. That's why that was all visited. So the point is that the pasuk is saying they're serving God. The Chassidus explains that what we mean is not just that you serve God in a time of abundance, when you're prosperous, but Meiroiv Kol means something else. That you serve God with joy that supersedes any other joy, any other pleasure. So this is like this. This is similar to what Chazal say, the ethics of our fathers. The sages say that one moment of repentance and performance of mitzvahs in this world is better than all of the world to come. It doesn't just say that it's better than the world to come, but mikol chaye olam haba, from all of the life in the world to come. Hainu. This means that why does it say all of Olam Haba, all of the life in the world to come? Because the world to come is also referred to as Kol. The word Kol, everything, is a reference to all of the world to come. Which incorporates, why is it in the word Kol, which means everything? Because it includes within it all of the pleasures of the world to come, of heaven. As is understood from what the previous Rebbe explains previously in previous chapters in the Maimer, in his Maimer Bepirish Kichol B'Shamayim V'Aretz, he explains the verse Kichol B'Shamayim V'Aretz, everything in heaven and on earth. And therefore, a moment of repentance and good deeds in this world is better than Miroiv Koil. Again, that term, Roiv Koil, from all the good, meaning Mikol Chayilam Haba, from all of the life in the world to come. Why? Because through our service in this world, we bring down atzvos, we cause a drawing down of God's essence. Let's explain what this means. So, just I guess a little bit of context. We say every day in davening, we quote from Chronicles, from Divrei Hayamim, we say, L'cha Hashem ha'gdula, v'ha'gevura, v'ha'tiferes, v'ha'netzach, v'ha'hoid, kichol v'ha'shamayim v'aretz, L'cha Hashem ha'mamlacha, v'ha'mestasa v'chalesh. So that's the verse, in the middle of davening before Yishtabach and Vayevarech David. So what does that mean? So when we say that verse of L'cha Hashem ha'gdula, v'ha'gevura, if you pay close attention to that verse, you'll see that it enumerates all of the divine attributes, starting with chesed, which is there in the verse. It's called Gedula. Gedula, why it's called Chesed is a different topic. But so Gedula is Chesed. And then you have Gevura, right? So L'cha Hashem HaGedula Chesed, Gevura, which is Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach v'Hoid, those are Netzach and Hoid. Kichol b'Shamayim v'Aretz. Everything in heaven and earth. What's that? What are we holding? We're holding Yesod. Kichol b'Shamayim v'Aretz is Yesod. Why is Yesod Kol b'Shamayim v'Aretz? The Targum translates, the Aramaic translation of this verse is the Achid Ba'ara B'Shmai Ba'ara, that it unites everything and brings together heaven and earth. Yesod, the quality of Yesod, that attribute of Yesod, is a bonding, bringing together of all of the previous 5 attributes and bonding it with what's below, with earth. So bringing heaven and earth together, that's Yesod, that bonding. So Koil, the word Koil, everything. Koil Bashmai words, Koil represents Yesod. Okay, which incorporates within it all of heaven and earth. In other words, when we talk about all of heaven, what do we mean by heaven? We mean all of the levels of heaven, all the different worlds in heaven. I'm referring to Gan Eden. We're going to get to Gan Eden soon. But we're talking about the pleasures of Olam Haba, of the world to come. That all of these are included. So the world to come, and when we say the world to come, we mean all of the levels of the world to come are all included in Kol. So let's go back to the verse that the Baal Shem Tov references when he says that a person would serve God with great joy, Meiroiv Kol. What does he mean by Meiroiv Kol? That he would serve God with such joy that's greater than all of the pleasures of Kol, of all of the pleasures of the world to come, of heaven. Why? Why would somebody mindful of the fact that his service impacts the spiritual worlds, impacts the angels, and most importantly to our conversation here at this moment, that it impacts God in his essence? Because what place does the pleasure of the world to come have when we're talking about impacting Atzmos, impacting God in his essence? So since we're talking about our service has the capacity to impact God, affect God in his essence, so obviously the joy for that is far greater than any joy that one can get from the lower place, which is Olam Haba, the world to come. So we see that serving God in this world, this is the meaning of, he says here, the meaning of Yafa Sha'achas B'Tshuva Ma'asim Tovim Ba'Olam Hazeh Mikol Chai Olam Haba, that a moment of tshuva and service of Hashem in this world is greater than all of the world to come, all the pleasures of the world to come, is because in the world to come, what does one have pleasure from levels, lower levels of godliness. But it's in this world, in a moment of tshuva, in a moment of service and divine service in this world, that one touches the essence of God, which is above and beyond all the pleasures of all the spiritual worlds. Again, what's the point of this whole conversation? Is to further underscore what the Baal Shem Tov is implying here is that a person, through his avodah, through his service, affects atzmos, brings, as it were, atzmos down into this world. Person sitting in this world saying words of Torah, if God in his essence is kissing him on the lips, where is that happening? It's happening here. So a person through his avodah can draw atzmos. So now this then is what the Friedrich Rebbe writes as he continues in this chapter 10. That the primary intent, the first intent of creation is that God desired a home in this world. This is the drawing down of atzmos, as we've said earlier. Because of this, because the whole purpose is to draw atzmos into this world, so therefore it would follow that what's the service in this world is the service of atzei shittim. Atzei shittim literally meaning the acacia wood, but as we've explained at length in previous chapters of this Maimer, and Rebbe's previous Maimer, atzei shittim word is not just shittim as a type of wood, acacia wood, but shittim from the word shtus, foolishness, that we transform, that we sift through and purify the foolishness of this world, lies atzei shittim aimdim, to turn them into atzei shittim aimdim, pillars that stand erect, bedugmas amudim shemechaber mesaritz beimagag, similar to beams that connect the roof and the floor, showing chibur olam imelikus, meaning connecting heaven and earth, connecting not heaven and earth, but the world, creation with godliness, with God. To the point that the world becomes a home for God, which is, as we said, what does it mean that it's a home? It's a dir, a home for God's essence. So we see the connection between these two things. The idea that we have to, that the God desires a home in this world. And that how do we go about doing that? This is the idea of we build a home for God, that through a person's service in this world, what is he causing? He's causing God to have a home in this world. So in other words, it's not just that this world you get by, you fulfill Torah and mitzvahs as a way to entertain you till you get to the higher worlds, as a way to get to heaven. But that the way to fulfill the whole purpose of creation, which is for God to have a home in this world, is by serving God in this world. When we serve God in this world, that's how we make a home for him in this world. And a home for God's essence. Chapter 3. Mamshech ba maimer bis ifanal. So the previous Rebbe continues in his Maimer. Again, in his chapter 10 of his Maimer, after he finishes this topic of Basi Legani. So the first part of the chapter 10 is he talks about Basi Legani, and he talks about making home for God, and he talks about to have a home in this world, that God desires a home in this world. Then he continues and connects it to Yesheves Began. Remember, we mentioned in the last class that chapter 10 is the end of the second installment of the series of Basi Legani. So the first installment, the first mimer of 5 chapters, that begins with the title, opens with the first Basi Legani. The second mimer starts with a quote of Hayesheves Bagan, the one who sits in the garden. So now at the end of that mimer, the previous Rebbe is tying it all together. So he ties together this idea of Basi Legani and Hayesheves Beganim, these two verses and these two ideas. And he says like this. He explains the verse with which he opens the second mimer, Hayesheves Beganim. So the pasuk we're talking about is the pasuk in Song of Songs, Hayesheves Beganim, Chaverim Akshivim L'Koilech Hashmi'ini. The pasuk says, the one who sits in the garden, the friends are listening to your voice. Hashmini, let me hear your voice. That's the verse. So the Hine b'pasuk zeh yesh gimel prushim. So he brings 3 commentaries, 3 interpretations on this verse. We're gonna sort of we're not going to touch on all 3 in all different ways. We're going to sort of merge 2 concepts together a little bit, and also we're not going to bring all 3 interpretations. The Rebbe says here there are 3 interpretations, but in the Rebbe notes in a subsequent follow-up by bringing into this one, the Rebbe says that in the Maimer he doesn't bring all 3 interpretations, only brings 2. But that's we'll leave that for another time. So the point is that, but there are 2 interpretations. So there are 2 parts. There's Yesheves Beganim. So it's who's sitting. There's the one sitting in the garden. So the question is, what's the garden? That's one thing. And then there's Chaverim, Makshivim L'Koilech, the friends who are listening to your voice. So who is it that's sitting in the garden? Where is this? Where is this garden? And who are the friends that are listening? So there are different interpretations. And he says, so the Rebbe says, V'yadua. So there are 3 interpretations of what exactly this means. Who we're talking about? V'yadua shekol hapirushim shebetoyrek shurim zeh b'zeh mashlim zeh. The Rebbe says parenthetically, this is something that was. This is, I think this is sort of the Rebbe's own idea that he repeated very, very often, that whenever you encounter multiple interpretations of a specific word or verse or concept, so even if they seem to go in opposite directions, they seem to be different, disparate ideas, nevertheless, if they all are an interpretation, a commentary on the same text, then they have to be connected. And here the Rebbe says, not only are they connected, but they actually complete each other. In other words, you need them all to come together to the fullness, the full fullness of whatever the original text is trying to convey. That the fullness of it can be appreciated through these different segments. So therefore, even though we're talking about different interpretations of who's who here, and obviously it's either this or that or the other, but nevertheless they're all connected and they all complement each other. They all work together. Pirush Aleph, the first interpretation is that the Ganim hem beis bechinas Gan Eden. That when it says you're sitting, Hayesheves Baganim, you're sitting in the garden, and gardens is Ganim in the plural, gardens. So we're talking about the 2 levels of Gan Eden. As we know, Gan Eden at Tachton, and Gan Eden Elyon. There's the lower Garden of Eden and there's the higher Garden of Eden. Ube Pratius Yaiser, and more specifically, Hine Beis Bechinas Gan Eden and Al Kailim Kama V'Kama Madregas. The Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, is not just a higher and lower, but within the higher and lower Garden of Eden, there are many, many levels. So when we say sitting in the gardens in the plural, we're talking about all of them, the full spectrum of levels of the Garden of Eden. So if Gan Eden, if the garden is Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, so then who's sitting in the garden? Hayesheves Beganim, Koyal Neshamis Gan Eden. We're talking about the souls. Who sits in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden? Those are the souls. The souls in the Garden of Eden. Kol Echad Lefi Madregas Avidase, each one in his level, Ad Ladarga Yisanas Began Eden, until the highest level of Gan Eden. So we're talking about souls sitting in the Garden of Eden, and where each soul, wherever they belong, wherever their place is in Gan Eden. And Veheim Nikroim B'Shem Chaverim. So these souls, so now let's go back to the verse. Hayesheves Baganim, Hayesheves, the souls that are sitting baganim in Gan Eden, chaverim akshivim chaverim, they're friends that are listening to your voice. They're friends. Why the souls sitting in Gan Eden referred to as chaverim? Why are they called friends? As the previous Rebbe notes explains in his Maimer parenthetically that the lepa'amim neshama min neshama netzalaschu. He explains why they called chaverim, because as he mentions, at times neshama min neshama netzalas, one soul gives way or it brings out, reveals another soul. This word netzelas is complicated. Like the Rebbe says, via shloimar, we can say shebediuk haloshin netzelas, when he uses this term netzal, because netzal, it kind of means create. That one neshama creates another, but it doesn't say bara. It says netzal. Neshama netzelas. One is sort of effused, if that even makes sense, one from another. What does this mean? Because the word netzal comes from the word atzilus. We know that, speaking very generally, there are four general spiritual worlds. There's Atzilus, that's the highest, and then you have Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, the worlds of that come in creation. There's a fundamental difference between the first and the last three. There's Atzilus, and then there's Bia, the last three. Obviously, one higher than the next, but there's a certain common denominator between the three that is lacking in the fourth in Atzilus, and that is that the three worlds, beginning with Bria, are already creation. Starting from the world of Bria, these spiritual worlds already feel, in whatever sense, and to varying degrees, depending on the level of that world, their own existence. Whereas Atzilus doesn't have any independent existence. Atzilus, on the one hand, is a world. We call it a world, Olam Atzilus, the world of Atzilus, which means it has sort of its dimensions, it has its space. However, it doesn't feel itself as separate from God. In the words of Kabbalah, God is completely one. It's a world of oneness, which is why it's called Atzilus. Bria, which means creation, that starts the next world down. We say creation when there's a feeling of otherness. Atzilus, on the one hand, is, we could say it's creation. It's a world. It's already something else. There's light and there are vessels. But on the other hand, we call it Atzilus because it's not really something that feels independent. And so therefore, the word netzal, Atzilus, means sort of a revelation of something that was concealed. So it was concealed before, and now it's revealed. In that sense, we define it as a world. But you can't really call it a full-fledged creation. Anyway, the Rebbe talks about this also in some of the other Basi Leganis, but this is, I don't want to get caught up in this. The point is that when we say neshama min neshama netzelas, one soul sort of gives rise or way to another, creates another soul, using the term netzal means we're talking about neshamas even as they are, Atzilus, because we're borrowing the term Atzilus from there. So Remez al hadarga hayesir al yonish began. This is a reference to the highest level in the garden, meaning Eden that's in the garden. Eden in the garden. The Gemara talks about the statement "Ayin lo yirasa lekim zosacha." No eye has ever been laid upon it except for God. What does that mean? Upon what? So the Gemara the sages give a bunch of different interpretations of what it means. One of them is we're talking about the Garden of Eden. So the Gemara asks, "What do you mean the Garden of Eden?" We know Adam was created where? In the Garden of Eden. That's where he spent his first day was in the Garden of Eden. So what do you mean? See, Adam saw it. So the Gemara answers no. There's the garden and there's Eden. Eden, Adam wasn't in, and Adam didn't see Eden. He was in the garden. How do we know that Eden and the garden are two different things? So the Gemara brings the pasuk in right in the beginning, Bereshis, v'nahar yoytza me'eden v'hishkas hagan, that a river flowed from Eden and irrigated the garden. So we see that it comes from Eden into the garden. So Eden and the garden are two different places. And the point is that Eden is already a higher level. And what does that refer to? Somewhere that even Adam wasn't at. We're talking about Atzilus that's higher than the world of Bria. So in other words, when we say that the Hayeshevas Baganim, what we're talking about is the full spectrum of the garden. We're talking about from the highest level, even from the Neshamas and Atzilus, the world of Atzilus, the highest level, all the way down even to the lowest. They were all, we call them Chaverim. So this then is the meaning that Chaverim, the friends, are listening to your voice. The souls that are in Gan Eden, who are called Chaverim, as we said. Makshivim l'koil ha'Torah v'atfila shel haneshamas hamlabashis beguf lamata. They listen to the sound of the Torah study and of davening of the neshamas as they are, the souls as they are, and clothed in bodies here in this world. So hayeshevas baganim, the souls that are sitting in the Garden of Eden, they are makshivim l'koilei. They're listening to your voice. Who are you? Who's you that the verse is talking about? The neshama as it is in this world down here. V'zeu hashmi'ini. This is the meaning of hashmi'ini. Let me hear your voice. She'em ha-neshamas shebegufim al yidei koil ha-Torah v'atfila hagormim ilu b'maylas aliyas ha-neshamas sheb'gan Eden. This then is hashmi'ini. Let me hear your voice, meaning the souls as they are in the world, in this world. The souls as they are in bodies, because through their Torah, they cause an Eloi, b'maylas aliyas ha-neshamas sheb'gan Eden. They enhance or help elevate the souls as they are in Gan Eden. So we see that a Jew, through his divine service down here in this world, enhances or elevates souls as they are in heaven. The second interpretation of Yeshevas Baganim is, you're not talking about the highest of levels. Yeshevas Baganim, that we're talking about the highest worlds, even Eden that's in the highest, talking about the Neshamas and Atzilus. But rather, Baganim is the Kefisha Neshamas in Began Eden. I'm sorry. We're not talking about the Neshamas as they are in the gardens, the highest gardens, meaning in the Garden of Eden, right? The Neshamas all the way up to Bechinas Atzilus. But we're talking about actually the lowest level. We're talking about the Jewish people as they are scattered in the exile and find themselves in foreign gardens, in other people's gardens. The souls down here find themselves in ganim, in gardens of others, which is binyanim shalom as a meaning in pleasures of the other side, because a gan is a place of pleasure. So they find themselves in indulgent, ungodly places. But in a manner of yeshiva, meaning settled there, really that they kind of sort of identify with that place, that they're not just strangers there, but that's where they are settled in to this lowest of places. When we call makim, nevertheless, they overcome the challenge, the test. And they sit in shuls and in study halls, lasik b'Torah, to study Torah. So in that case, Hayesheves Baganim, the Jewish people in exile are sitting in Ganim, not the highest levels, Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, in this blissful spiritual place, but the Ganim meaning in exile, in Golos. And nevertheless, they go into the study hall to sit and study Torah. So then the friends, who are the friends now? The friends, Shehem Malachi Asharis, the divine angels, Shenikrim Chaverim. They're called friends, also they're called friends. So the neshamas are called friends because they impact each other. Neshama and neshama netzeles, as we said before. Malachim are also called friends. Why are they called friends? Because there's no jealousy or hatred or competition between them. So therefore, they're all the best of friends. So they are makshivim l'koilei. They listen to your voice. The angels stop what they're doing, so to speak. They come down to listen to the Jew who's sitting in exile studying Torah. Behind Shema Yois Shah Neshamis Lamata. Notwithstanding the fact that the souls down here find themselves in other gardens, they're in a state that you can't call them chaverim. In this interpretation that we're talking about, Yeshevas Beganim means that we're talking about souls in exile sitting in foreign gardens. You can't call them chaverim because they're sitting in a hostile environment. So therefore, it has to be that we're talking about the angels. Nevertheless, these friends are listening to your voice. That the angels sit and listen to the sound of the neshamas that are in bodies, even when they're in such a state, when they're sitting in the garden of others. What we did here at the end of this chapter, at the end of this paragraph, is really combined, as I mentioned at the beginning here, we combined sort of two interpretations, because there's an interpretation, Hayeshevas Beganim, that there's the Ganim, the garden is the Garden of Eden. Who are the Chaverim? The Chaverim are the friends. They are no, I'm sorry, we didn't. I'm sorry. But in the final interpretation, I'm sorry, we didn't combine the two. There's the first interpretation, which is the chaver that the neshama is sitting in Gan Eden, who are the chaverim, are listening to the Jew who's sitting and studying Torah. And the third interpretation, the second one we didn't mention here, we're not discussing, but the third one, which is the Jew sits in exile, and who's listening? The heavenly angels. They're the ones who are listening to his to their teaching Torah. Okay. And since Yahishevas Beganim in this interpretation refers to the Jewish people as they are in exile, so therefore they can't be the Chaverim themselves because we live in a world of competition, and there's great competition, at least because of our bodies. But we're talking about the angels, that the angels come and listen to the Jew sitting and listening to the study of Torah. And Mirza Hashem will continue the rest of chapter 3 in the next class.